Thanks for agreeing to do an interview with us. How are you involved in efforts to help Coho salmon?
So my group, California Sea Grant, as part of the Russian River Salmon and Steelhead Monitoring Program, we conduct a bunch of different monitoring studies in Dutch Bell Creek. We trap them as they're making their way down to the ocean. We do adult surveys, so we hike the creek and see how many adults are in the creek and see how many redds or fish nests that they're digging in the creek. We conduct snorkel surveys where we actually snorkel up the pools in the creek to see how many salmon are in each of those pools. We're monitoring the populations of fish out there in the creek. We collect this information and we provide it to managers at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and other agencies to help them understand how well the population is doing. And then they're able to make decisions about how best to help the fish. The other part of what we're doing is that we provide this monitoring information to restoration groups who can then use it to do a particular type of restoration that they think will have the most impact. We've worked with the water releases on Dutch Bell Creek as well. Our fisheries monitoring information helped guide those efforts, like when to release water, how much water to release, how big of an impact those releases are having.
Why do you think it's important to help out Coho salmon?
So Coho salmon are an integral part of the whole ecosystem. More than 137 species of animals rely on them as a food source. Salmon in general throughout the Pacific Northwest. A big part of it is that they go out to the ocean for part of their life cycle and they feed in the ocean. As they're feeding, they're collecting all these marine nutrients. As the adult salmon come upstream, they bring these nutrients in their bodies with them. And after they spawn, the adult salmon die. And then as their bodies decompose, all these marine nutrients that have been collected in the ocean are then basically like a fertilizer in these streams. There's been studies that have shown that streams that have healthy populations of salmon are healthier. There's a much wider array of wildlife in those forests than streams that don't have salmon. Salmon are also important for other reasons. They're a healthy and nutritious food source for many people. And culturally, they're very important to Native Americans. Many Native Americans have relied on salmon populations for thousands of years.
If you look at all the people who are trying to help Coho salmon, what's your view on how successful that has been overall?
I think there's been a lot of successes, especially in the Russian River. And we have data to show that, like in the early 2000s, there were less than 10 Coho salmon returning to all the streams throughout the Russian River. And historically, we think there were tens of thousands. Pretty much, we think that those fish would have gone extinct if some sort of intervention hadn't happened. So what agency personnel did is they started the Russian River Coho salmon captive broodstock program, which is up at Warm Springs Dam at the fish hatchery there. And that's where they collected a few of the little juvenile fish that were in creeks still in the early 2000s. And they brought them up to the hatchery and they raised these little fish into adult fish up at the hatchery. And then they look at the genetics of those fish and they spawn them out with other fish that are not closely related to them to have high quality genetics in their offspring. The populations have increased and there's a general trend that the populations are going up. That being said, there's still a long way to go.
So in your opinion, what is leading to that success?
I think that there's been a concentrated effort by resource agencies and habitat restoration groups in the area. They've worked together using information from our program and others to improve salmon habitat. Landowners and other organizations are more informed, I feel like, about what's going on in their streams. And there's been a lot of cooperation between groups like resource conservation district groups and restoration companies and organizations such as Westminster Woods to put habitat in the streams to make it better for salmon and other fish, as well as working with groups to collect rainwater and store water so that during the summer months, people don't have to take as much water from creeks or from wells near the creeks.
Great. Can you tell us more about how communication is important in your work or important for helping Coho salmon?
Sure. We communicate our monitoring results to resource agencies like the Department of Fish and Game. That's very important because they need to know what's going on out there. And so we go out and collect that data and analyze it. We have to communicate to these groups and tell them what's happening in the watershed And then these groups take that information, they make decisions like, oh, let's try a different approach to see if that works to help the fish even more. And another aspect of communication is connecting with landowners who own property streamside to let them know what's going on in the creek, answer any questions they have, get access for areas of stream that we haven't been before. I like to, help educate the landowners about the different efforts that are being made to try and help recover these salmon populations.
Awesome. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, I just think it's really great that there's a group of young individuals that are interested in what's going on with salmon in these streams and what they can do to help. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time and for doing this.
Thanks for having me.